In this lesson, we'll learn about the wire deformer. The wire deformer lets us deform objects by a curve. So with it, we can create some really nice flexibility in the objects tied down by the wire. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll first create the wire, and then we'll see how it all operates, how the deformer works. We'll head over to our top view, and we'll create a curve right at the center of our arm. So heading over to Create, CV Curve Tool Options, let's make sure our settings are reset. We'll be working with a cubic curve degree. Now the more points we create on our curve, the more control we'll have over our deformations. I'll create about 2 points around the shoulder, 1 at the elbow, 2 more around the wrist, and 1 at the edge of the middle finger to finish. So at that point, we could hit Enter and head over to our perspective view. Okay, let's say we head over to Create Deformers and choose the Wire tool, and we'll take a look at the options to make sure they're also reset. So at the top, we have holders. Holders basically limit the effect of the main wire deformer, or essentially hold certain areas. So if you don't want as much deformation in certain areas on your mesh, go ahead and work with holders, and we'll take a look at how they work. The envelope parameter, this is what basically regulates how much the wire will affect the mesh. So as we bring this value to 0, there will be no effect at all. 1 means that wire will fully control that arm. The crossing effect parameter, this is for working with multiple wires. So this is a way of blending between those 2 wires. And then the local influence kind of works in a similar way, only we can define what will be the local influence when working with multiple wires. Now the next one, drop-off distance, if we notice that the wire isn't quite affecting our mesh the way we'd like it to, let's say we hardly notice any deformation at all, well, we could start to increase the drop-off distance, thus increasing the amount of deformation that will be created by that wire. And then we could also, from here, group our wire and base wire together. So as that wire separates from its base wire, that Maya essentially clones as a reference object, as it separates from that, that's how we create our deformations. But if you want to have everything move globally, you'd want to group the wire and the base wire together and then move them at the same time. So that's what this option does. All right. And then underneath, this is basically a way of setting our deformation order to make sure everything will deform correctly with no double transformations. If you'd like to learn more about your deformation order settings, look into our blend shape lesson. All right, well, with that said, let's say we go ahead and create the wire. So if you notice at the bottom left of Maya, we have instructions on how to set up the wire, but essentially it's as follows. We'd first select the mesh that will be influenced by the wire and hit Enter. The next thing we need to select is the wire itself and hit Enter, and you'll notice now the wire has been applied. If you're working with a holder, you'd select the holder next and then hit Enter, and then you can deselect to kind of finalize the process, hit Enter again, and your holder will be in place. So we'll take a look at that. All right, but let's go ahead and see what this does. If we were to go ahead and head over to component mode with our curve selected and go to wireframe and start to move our curve around, okay, we don't see anything happening at all. So what parameter do we need to change to start seeing deformations? Well, that's our drop-off distance. So what we'll do is head over to our channel box. We'll find that under the outputs, we'll see a wire 2 node. Let's go ahead and expand that. Let's take our drop-off distance and increase this to, let's say, a value of 10. And now, as we start to move this point, the arm will deform. So this is great for cartoony type of setups. Notice we also have a parameter for rotational effects. Doesn't really do too much. Chances are you're going to want to leave this at 1 for a better orientation in your topology, so you can kind of see the difference. It's almost as if setting this to 0 is really only affecting the position, whereas setting this to 1, we affect the orientation of the topology also. We could also adjust the local scale of the arm using the scale parameter. So again, this is a really neat deformer for maybe cartoony effects. If you like to create a smear control on your characters, chances are you'd want to use this deformer. You could also use it for more realistic setups as well. Let's say if you want to create some type of pressure, if your character is pressing their fingers on a table, for instance, this might be a really neat deformer to experiment with to create that type of volume that would be created as the character presses his or her fingers on that surface. Alright, well, if I were to just go ahead and undo before the curve was applied, we should see this as our undo, complete current tool. And now the curve no longer has any influence over the mesh. So let's say we head over to create, there's primitives, and we'll create a circle. I have interactive creation off. And this is going to be our holder. So I'll just go to the inputs of this circle, set the radius to 5, and then we can rotate it 90 degrees in the x-axis, or in our case, the z-axis. And then go ahead and move this over to the arm. Alright, at this point what I'd like to do is freeze the transformations and also delete the history to clean up the curve. Alright, so we can head back over to our wire tool. We can just press the Y key if we like, or just double click on our settings so we can go ahead and turn on holders. And then at this point, closing our settings, we'll select our mesh, hit enter, select our curve, hit enter. Now we need to select our holder. We'll select the circle we just created, hit enter. And the last thing, if we have nothing else to add, we can go ahead and deselect, hit enter to finalize the process. So you see that now we have this holder in place. Let's go ahead and take our wire input, or output that is. Let's go ahead and increase the distance to 10 again. I'll go ahead and take the circle and go ahead and bring that up. You see that now, if we were to go back to our inputs, we could start to modify a few of our settings. So for instance, if we were to, let's say, take our tension, start to increase that, and then go to our wire and start to deform it, what we'll see is that as we take our holder and start to modify this, it's going to kind of create a shift on our mesh, again, to hold certain areas a little bit more. We get a really neat effect as we transform this in the x-axis. It's almost like a sliding effect, just to give you an idea of what else you could use a holder for. Now, something else I'd like to show you, if we were to go ahead and undo the moves we just made, we'll keep the wire deformer applied to the surface, but let's go to our display layers. Go ahead and turn on wire 2. We have another setup here. And in this setup, basically have 2 wires applied. Just so we could check out a few other settings we have. So under outputs, wire 1, we have our cross effect. Again, this is going to kind of control the blending between the 2 wires. So if I were to take this wire, bring that down, let's say, take our main wire, go ahead and start to bring this up. We can now go to the cross effect. And you can see how things become less rigid as we increase the cross effect amount. We also have our tension parameter. This is going to control how much influence the wires will affect the surface. And then we have more distance parameters and scaling parameters. So being that I have applied the circle as the second wire deformer, you can see with the second scale, it's going to influence the area that the second wire will influence. So this is really neat stuff, and something I'd highly recommend you experiment with to create either realistic deformations in your characters, or in this case what we saw is more cartoony effects, more exaggerated flailing type of deformations that could look really neat on a character.